what is the role that I'm going to.
Right, so think about within the context of your grasp frame. Think about what specific materials would you use within that grasp framework with your students?
Some cases, thinking or giving some roles, different roles to each member of the team. One is the client, the other is the guy who is trying to help the client, and other guy is the one that is going to identify how to fix something. Each one playing different roles.
Are there any materials that you would use or have your students use in that performance test?
No, well, I have general cases. What I have to do is to change it in order to identify different roles, and so they can play and they can make a kind of simulation. So they can face a situation close to the real.
Alright. And what kind of situation or simulation would that be? Can you be more specific? What kind of activity would this be?
Well, maybe a problem, a guy with a business. I want to make my operations manual.
Okay.
I know what to do, but I don't know what the other people do. And I want to put all that information in paper. And,
so they know what they do, but they don't know what everybody else does?
Yeah. And I want to know how I relate my work, how I relate to others. Because
so this is what you want your students to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And so they can go interview people, and what do you do? And they identify, okay, how do you start your process? I start my process when somebody asks me something. Okay. So they can identify what the task they do. And
alright. So what kind of materials could your students use during that performance?
what kind of materials?
When I say materials, I mean objects, I mean materials, things that they can use.
I think just paper and pencil, because all the other stuff is talking. Maybe to develop a kind of a guide that I give you some guide, I give you a different guide, a guide related to the role you have to play, and you have to behave in that way, and you're going to give this information.
So when the students are asking other people questions, what are they asking? What's the purpose of that interview? Is it an interview? Like an interview?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the purpose of the interview?
Okay, the purpose of the interview is I want to know what you do in order, so I have to identify the different tasks and I can put it in the interview.
Okay.
And just, okay, that guy does it.
And what's the purpose? Why do they need to write out all of this? Why do they need to know?
Okay, they need to know how process is performed, so they can identify how different processes related to each other, so they can make better decisions.
Okay.
They can make better decisions because maybe I solve a problem with one issue, with one perspective, but I didn't take account another, and my decision may lead us to a worst scenario because I'm fixing your problem, but I'm giving a lot of troubles to other people.
So what kind of knowledge, what kind of understandings should the student have to be able to do the interview?
Wow.
And it's related to what you just explained.
Okay.
And this can be technical. This can be related to your discipline.
Well, they have to know the notation, the right notation, business process management, so they can use this notation. They have to know how to do flow diagrams.
Okay.
It's flow diagrams. It's common to see in high school, and they can use that to identify the process.
All right. But let's say that let's say that they know the flow charting.
They have to know what all the parts, pieces of a business, or areas that have a business.
Example?
It's like accounting, finance, production, operations, systems, information systems, and they have to know that all these areas or divisions or departments exist in the business, that it can be different in one business than another because they have different activities and does things in different ways. They have maybe even business can be organized in different ways.
All right.
Sometimes have divisions, sometimes have business units, sometimes they have departments, maybe they work by projects.
Okay. So all those things that you just mentioned, the understanding, some sort of the knowledge of departments, different projects. Are there any materials that would be part of this performance task that would be needed, that would be helpful, that would be required for your students to perform this task? I mean, I understand that maybe one part of it is an interview, but are there any, think of the entire performance task. Are there any materials that would be part of this performance task? Now this could be materials that they use. This could be materials that they create, either or both. Materials that they use. Because here's the thing, what I want us to think about with a performance task. A performance task would be like looking at someone's real life and taking a little task that they do, but in real life. And in real life, most of the time, unless we're like just philosophers, if we're just philosophizing, maybe we don't need a whole lot of materials. We can just sit and talk. Right? But most of what we do in real life, in some degree, in some way, requires materials. This is material. I mean, when I say materials, objects, materials, something physical. This is material. This is material. This is material. This is material. iPad. There's material. There's material. And think about when we create a performance task, what materials would be involved in this interaction, this performance, that would be part of the performance task itself? Because one thing is speaking, of course, and writing, and listening, the communication is certainly, that's part of it. But usually we communicate and we interact with objects too. Just like we're doing now. We're sitting in chairs, we're interacting. I might be recording, you might be looking at your phone, you might be accessing this. Right? But think about in this case, in this business scenario, and I'm thinking like ISO. Right? ISO 9,000, right? This is kind of like documenting all of the different responsibilities of a business. But what's the point of ISO? Improvement. Some understanding of different departments, but also to improve, like quality control or cause and effect. What happens in one department maybe affects another department, might affect another department, and having that relationship. So think about those understandings. It goes back to the understandings. Remember that a performance task is not just a performance task. It's not just, okay, here's a task. No, it should be part of these understandings. Remember in the first week we talked about understandings, maybe some essential questions, and we also talked about declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. Now the declarative knowledge is easy. It's knowing the different departments, just like you told me, knowing something about the accounting department and what they do, knowing something about the purchasing department, knowing what they do, and knowing the relationship between accounting and purchasing and the plant, and being able to see these relationships. But the performance task should provide the means, the way that your students show their understandings to you. And you could just give a quiz. You could give a quiz, multiple choice, answer quiz. Okay, that's one way. This is another way. Performance. Create the performance. You're a designer. You are a learning designer as a teacher. Create the environment where they interact and they show you their understandings. They show you their declarative knowledge. They show you their tacit knowledge, their procedural knowledge. They're able to engage and discuss essential questions. Not these low-level questions. Not as, what is the accounting department? But these higher level, higher critical thinking types of questions. This performance task provides that opportunity in some sort of quote-unquote authentic way. It's you try to create it in a way that students say, oh, okay, this, I probably would have to do this. I could see myself having to do this when I am out in the profession. As a professional, I could see how I need to do this. It's not a, hypothetical, it's not, okay, write on the board this, right? It's actually a scenario, a situation where they can relate to. Because the idea is, if we can relate this to their own professional interests, they're going to be hopefully more motivated to engage, to participate. Okay, so here is when we look at these performance tasks, and that's fine. This is a very good way to look at one performance task. But also think about the materials, and with those materials, how you might adapt those materials, because these are English language learners. This is not looking at materials and maybe in your own language if we're talking about text-based materials. So when we're thinking about this, right, maybe part of it is the interview, but maybe it goes beyond that, and they have to do some sort of analysis. Okay, they have all the information about the different positions, or maybe it's just two positions. All right, how can they, improve or diagnose or even critique or evaluate the processes, the business processes that are going on. Because that is, in a sense, that's what ESO is all about, is to lay out all of this information and then say, okay, how can we improve? It's an improvement measure. It's not just to have it on paper. It's to say, okay, you're analyzing, say, okay, maybe we can do something different.
Well, maybe, I don't know if I'm right. Creating designing the process and make a simulation to see how it works, that process. To identify which task is weak, which task is not working all the time, is maybe 20%, 30%. So they can identify, hey, this is not working well, maybe we have to change things. And that they can do with the software we use. They can design the process and assign some time for making some task, and the frequency they perform that task in the period of time. And they can emulate or simulate maybe a week, a month, and see which task or role is more busy than others. To see if there are some resources that are not applied for.
Okay, so does the software program, what does the software program do exactly in the analysis? What is it doing?
Well, it's like a flow chart diagram. Okay. You can draw all your items and connect it and see which direction is going that process, and assign this kind of information as to make simulations.
All right, when you say make simulations, the computer program makes the simulations?
Yeah.
Okay. And, okay, so they would put in, okay, they purchase so many units of something, and, or I'm trying to understand, like, what's the students, you probably are asking your students to think critically and do something with this information. Make decisions, or analyze, or synthesize. So what would, in this performance task, okay, you use the computer software, but what are the students doing with that information? What would you ask them in this performance task?
To redesign the process.
Redesign.
Redesign it.
Why?
If they found some errors,
okay,
or delays,
all right,
or lazy resources, they have to redesign.
All right, now
okay, this is not working well. How can I change it?
All right. Does the computer program say that it's working well or not, or do they have to determine?
They have to determine it.
Okay.
Because the computer program only gives you some numbers.
Okay. All right.
This is working 10%.
Okay. So
maybe it's what you want, but I don't know. The interpretation is given by the student.
All right. So obviously, one material is going to be the software. Okay. Software is one material that they use. Now, when you say that the students determine if something's not working correctly or that something is working correctly, it's probably based on some theoretical concept, some term that they are learning in your class, correct?
They should have.
Or maybe they should already know.
Yeah, maybe in operation management.
But there's some sort of theoretical concept there, right? That they should.
Critical path.
Okay. All right. So these concepts that you want your students to do. Let's go back to the interview. Now, when you go back to the interview, maybe it's a guide that they can use, an interview guide. Like if they're going to interview somebody, maybe they have a guide that they can use to help them based on certain concepts that they need to be looking for. or I don't know, something that they would need to ask about to guide them.
Well, the interview, they should, all the information gathered, all the information they should obtain is the time that they spend making some task, how frequent is that task performed, and so they can gather information to put it in the software so they can simulate the process.
So, okay, all right. So there's no questions about how they interact with other departments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm saying. I don't know how many questions we're talking about, but I'm just thinking about if they were going to go in and interview to make sure that they ask all the right questions, that they have some sort of guide that they use so that they don't leave and say, oh,
I forgot that
I forgot
question.
to ask that question. Because remember, they're doing this in English. I mean, probably in Spanish too, that this would be helpful, but more so in English.
Yeah.
They're not gonna, they're struggling with the language. They're gonna need materials, guides, whatever. So,
As a guy that basic questions.
Whatever. Totally depends.
Elementary questions.
Maybe. Or maybe it could be, okay, remember to ask this person about purchasing and the plant, or whatever. I mean, whatever it is, whatever that interview is, they create some sort of guide, or you provide the guide, or maybe it's a standard, whatever it is. But this would be a material. This would be an example of material that they could use in the interview. Now, this is only the interview. What other materials? Okay, the software. Okay, that's one material. What else? All right, when they analyze that information from the software, then they might need to do something with that. Now, what are they going to do? They're either going to write something or they're going to say something or communicate. They need to communicate. They need to make a decision based on this computer output. Okay? And they need to judge it good or bad. If it's bad, all right, how do they change it? And then what do you want their teacher, what do you want them to do in this performance task to correct or to improve the situation? Whether it's another part of the program, or whether it's something else, a chart, or whatever it happens to be.
I designed the process, I put all the information, I made the simulation, and I identified that there are some tasks that are really busy and others that are not. The next step is if I can change the task. Maybe they do that process for a reason. Maybe it's the core business. But if not, maybe I can change it. So yeah, to make have more productivity. I'm sorry, I have to. Yeah, it's my wife, and she knows that I'm in course. Bueno, ¿qué hago? Estoy en el curso.
Ah, aquí usted. ¿Qué pacho?
¿Vale? Te lo mandé por WhatsApp. Te lo mandé por WhatsApp, es el 686.
Pues no, es que no sé qué número dijeron ahí. Hubo muchas cosas que no las escuché. Sale, venga. Ya está.
So yeah, so material. So when you're thinking about the whole GRASPS framework, the GRASPS framework is really to include that whole task, thinking about the materials that could be used, thinking about how to adapt the materials if need be, if it's necessary. Think about the products or materials that they also create. Now, they can create a software program, they can create a brochure, PowerPoint presentation, whatever they can
priority table.
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
So that they can list all the tasks, and these tasks can be done only if the task 1 or 2 are done.
Right, because that's what you're going to be looking for, so that you know, or that you can infer if they understand the understandings.
Okay.
That's how you're going to evaluate. So you have to anticipate and think, okay, what do I want them to do, and what materials will they need to do that? All of these things. How can I adapt, or how can they adapt the content to make it easier? Like if it's a guide, an interview guide, they might organize it in such a way that it makes sense for them. That's the idea, is to use this performance task to say, okay, what kind of materials are going to be part of this? How can I adapt those materials? How does this link to the understandings, the essential questions? All of those things that you can right, exactly. So the idea is to talk about the performance task with all the other concepts that link to that. Because the performance task is just an action. It's just something to do. What you need to be more specific about is, okay, think about materials, what they're going to do, what concepts. That's where the declarative knowledge, right? You're going to be looking for certain key concepts, certain words, as they do this performance. You're going to be looking for understandings, maybe the essential questions you're going to pose this question someplace in the performance, whether it's before, during, or after the performance. But the idea is to try to bring all of those together, right? That they're all aligned, that it's not just looking at a task, right, by itself, but you're trying to consider all these different factors, so that you or the students, you can work together so that the students learning English have a better level of success. They have a better chance of succeeding if they can actually do it. Because if they look at, let's say that you give them, what would be a good example? Maybe it's a handout that shows, key concepts for proper, business operations, and you want them to understand those. It may not be enough just to give them a handout. You may have to ask them, okay, make notes on the side, right? Or underline key words. Or these are different ways to adapt it so that they can use that information. So they just don't say, oh, okay, this is too difficult. I'm just going to ask questions in my interview. No, but they look at that document, they notate it, whatever, and then they try to use that information, that material in the performance itself. That's the idea. So that's.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's hard. That's why this is a good time. Last week was a good time that I like to spend just as a review, to try to say, okay, let's try to put all this together, because it's hard. We've got understandings, essential questions, declarative knowledge, tacit knowledge, materials, adapting materials, even adapting your speech, performance tasks, and all of these things. So it's trying to bring this together into kind of a coherent activity, and thinking of what it would look like in your own teaching practice. And so the idea with this video is to kind of share some of that, how you might do this. And we're going to have more opportunities to do a video very similar to this, where it's basically you sharing how you do it in your own context. It would be like, okay, I've got this performance task, here's the understandings. The students will understand that, blah, blah, blah. Here's the essential question that I'll ask my students. How do you create these good dynamics between the accounting department and the purchasing department? And I would use these materials. These are the materials that the students could use to perform this task. This is how they could adapt the material to learn. And watch the people. This is the idea. right, so kind of changing gears now, folks. So thinking about this week, we're going to be focusing again on strategies. Okay, so last week was more about the task, the performance task, and the input, schemata. This week, looking at strategies, and we talked about thinking about the differences between learning strategy and skill. What's again the difference between a learning strategy and a skill? How do those two link?
Okay, on the skill, we saw that is the ability or some kind of that people are able to do something or to perform some task. And the strategy was I thought it was more as a whole, how they can, but as I remember, it was how they are going to do something using that skill.
Right. This morning, one of the teachers, because we're talking about also strategies and skills in the other SIOP course. And one of the teachers mentioned something about dancing and how dancing can be a skill, right? Skills are degrees. It's not always like you can do it or you can't do it. There's always a lot of degrees. So if dancing is looked at as a skill, I remember when I was, my wife and I a long time ago were taking dance classes. And I remember one of the teachers telling us, okay, when you're doing, I think we were doing like that song, right? That song. And he was telling us like how to count and to stay in this little square, right? And stay in this little square and count to like 9 or something. It was like some number. So I remember thinking, okay, now my skill for dancing was really low, and it still is. It's very low, right? Right? I was learning how to do that in song. My skill is very low. So what he did, he said, okay, count and think of this little square. Just stay right in that little square. So what he was doing was he was giving me the strategy. The strategy was how to help me learn how to do that song, dance, this particular dance. And at the beginning, right, it was like, okay, 1, 2, and I'm thinking, I'm not hardly listening to music, I'm just kind of seeing where my feet go and I'm counting, right, because I'm learning how to do the dance. And so that strategy was a conscious effort because the skill for me was almost nothing. I didn't know how to do it. So if I kept doing that and got to be really, really good at that song, sooner or later, I don't need the strategy anymore. Right? I don't need it. I don't need to count. I don't even need to think of a little square. It's just automatic dancing. I'm doing it. And the skill now has reached a level where it's automatic. I don't have to think about it, and I don't need a strategy because I have a skill. So that strategy is there to help develop the skill. Now let's think about your classes and within the context of the sports. We have a lot of different skills involved, many skills. We have language skills. We have now skills of using the program that you can use. Other technical skills that are specific to your area, your expertise. But let's just think about language just for a moment. Just language. The different skills. Listening, speaking, reading, writing. Each one of those are 4 skills that students are going to have to try to develop. And that's the purpose. Each of those 4 skills has possible strategies for each and all of those skills. Specific strategies to help them. If they say, teacher, I can't speak English, I'm horrible at speaking. That's when we have to come up and say, okay, but let's try it. Let's try this, and I'm going to give you some tips, some strategies. I'll give you some ideas, some things that you might be able to do to help you with your speaking. I'm going to give you some tips when you're listening to a video. I'm going to give you some tips that will help you understand, comprehend that video. So this is what, now these are very, very specific strategies that we want to start thinking about and talking about and considering whenever we're trying to help our students, because they're not going to have these strategies automatically. They're not going to know, probably.
Yeah, they can.
Most students aren't going to know. They're not going to know, oh, I can underline text. I mean, we might think it's obvious, but if we don't mention it, they're probably not going to do it. Now, some of the good students will. And most of the time, the difference between a good student and a poor student is a good student has a good grasp of these strategies. They know what to do when they don't know what to do. You know, they know what to do when they can't do something.
Where to start?
They know where to start, but they know, like, if, oh, you know what, this video, I don't understand anything, but I know if I pause the video, or if I use subtitles, or if I pause it and take notes, or if I just ask questions, they know they have these strategies available, and they tend to be stronger students because of that. Now, we can't assume, and I don't assume, because most of my students don't use strategies. And I have to help them become aware, help them make a decision as to which strategies work for them. And, you know, the idea is not to tell them which strategies. It's not that, okay, everybody has to take notes when you watch this video. No, you can say, okay, some of you, if you want to use a dictionary while you watch the video, you know, if you want to ask a partner, or all these are different strategies that we can try to promote whenever we're helping our students. All right, so think about your own practice, and think about a situation where maybe you've used some strategies, or maybe your students have used a strategy in your Spanish speaking class. And then think about that same scenario with English language speakers. And think about any strategies that would be similar and or different. Think about now like a Venn diagram, and think about it. You can write a Venn diagram on a sheet of paper and write it on one side. Spanish class, the other circle is the English class, and then in those circles, and wherever they may need to appear, think about any specific strategy that would be similar or different. Now, the strategy needs to link to the same skill. So, for example, if I'm talking about any skill that has to do with speaking, keep it the same. This strategy is for speaking, and in my Spanish speaking class, I would do this type of strategy. In my English speaking class, maybe that same strategy would work, or maybe it wouldn't work. Or maybe I would use different strategies.
But it has to be for the speaking.
But for speaking, okay. Now maybe another one is for, that could be even using a technical skill, like using a skill for using a program, maybe. But think about it, okay, English, Spanish, whatever those strategies and skills are, think of it in the two different contexts. And again, the objective here is to be able to identify the strategy and the skill, and how they link. It's not just any old strategy. We need to be able to link the strategy to the skill, or the strategies, plural, to the skill. Maybe we have 4 strategies for speaking. And in English class, or maybe let's change that. 1 strategy for speaking in Spanish, 3 strategies for English. So it could also be additional strategies. That you say, no, in my Spanish class, either it's not necessary, or I don't do it, or I don't know how to do it, I don't want to do it, whatever. But in English, these are the strategies that would work. when you're doing this, think about, I've got this way here that you can get some ideas about specific strategies. Let me show you one strategy here. Okay, now there are many, many strategies here for different types of skills. But let's look at one example, maybe a couple of examples. Open this up. Now this is going to be called a gist reading strategy. So now you already know, first of all, it's a strategy. And which skill does it relate to? Reading. That's the key here. It's not saying, oh, I know all these strategies. That's not enough. Do I know the strategies and how they affect or how they can help certain skills? That's the key. Because you want to be able to say, okay, I know my students need to have this skill. What strategies can I help them with? How many strategies can I offer them or suggest to them so that they can decide themselves which strategies to use? Let's take a look at this example, the gist strategy.
Today I'm going to teach you what's called the gist reading strategy. Okay. Does anybody know what the word gist means? Yes. The main idea of something.
So the gist in English actually is a word. Yeah, it's a word, gist, and it means to get the main idea of something.
Okay.
So if you ask your students to read like an article, you say, okay, what's the gist of the article? That would be, what's the main idea? What's the main idea of the article? Okay. So this is a strategy. Right. It's like to summarize. It's a summary. But gist is even shorter. It's like one sentence or one phrase. So this is it's a strategy to help reading, but specifically to find the main idea of the reading. That is what type of strategy this is.
How do you find the main idea? How do you find the gist? Yes. By reading the story. What if it's a really long story? What should you do if it's a really long story? Yes. Skim over it. What else should you do though to find the gist?
Okay, so she's asking questions like, okay, what happens when you have a long text? Okay, so you have a long text. What can you do to try to understand that long text? And they mentioned scanning. Now, scanning is a reading strategy. It's different now from gist, but it's a reading strategy. Scanning would be looking for certain words. Skimming is another one. Skimming and scanning. So skimming would be just to read very quickly. It would be like reading the headings first and maybe just the first sentence of each paragraph. Right? Where you're just kind of reading very, very lightly throughout. Scanning would be to look for certain words. You're not even reading, you're just looking for words. Right? So if you said, okay, I've got a list of keywords here in the article, I want you to find these keywords. And then you say, okay, first word, accounting. This is the first word, accounting, and then look for the word accounting without actually reading the article. Okay. So these are strategies, skimming and scanning.
Yes. Read the back of it. Okay. Let me teach you something that will help. The gist reading strategy. Okay, I just had you to read our text, Killing Your Back. It's an informational article. If it's informational, it's nonfiction. It's not fake. So the gist reading strategy, if the article was 3 pages long, how many of you read something you don't remember what you read after it's that long? If it's 3 pages long, then after each paragraph in the margins, you could write a little one-sentence blurb about what you just read.
So what she's suggesting here is another strategy is when you're reading a long article, you look at one paragraph, and a strategy is to write off an annotation, right off to the side of the paragraph, a very short sentence or phrase about the main idea of that paragraph. That's another strategy that they actually write, or if it's electronic, they put a comment next to the paragraph, so that each paragraph has a summary of each idea.
Be your gist, your main idea of each paragraph. So instead of going back and reading the whole article, what could you go back and read? You could go back and read what you wrote in the margins after each paragraph. That's your gist. Okay? So, in the article, when you think of gist, you need to think about who, what, when, where, and why. Okay, in the article, our text, Killing Your Bag. What's the who? Who's the, yeah. Okay, who is it about? Who is it talking to? It's talking to you, okay? It's talking to you.
Okay, so she's using the question words. Now, there's a lot of different ways that students can use these question words as a strategy to understand text. All right. One is, who's the audience? Who is the writer? When they're reading, who is the intended audience? That could be one. If you're looking at each individual paragraph, the paragraph is typically going to address one or some of these question words about the idea, the one idea of the paragraph. A paragraph is one idea. That's why we have paragraphs. We create paragraphs to say, okay, this is one idea that we're going to talk about. So in the paragraph, they could, off to the side, state the topic of the paragraph, and in the margins, say who, write out the word. Who, what, why, where, so that they can recognize what they are talking about there in that paragraph. Okay? Let's see what else here.
Specifically, it's talking to people that do what? Text. Okay? What is the what? What's it about? Yes. Okay? It's about science. It's about health. When you put your neck down, the text is hurting your back over time.
Alright, so basically what she's going to do is go through each one of these. When your students are writing out annotations next to each paragraph, they can state one or several of these very generally to get the gist of that paragraph.
Not always have to answer all the questions.
You answer the questions that are applicable to the paragraph. So think about this as a strategy for each paragraph. One paragraph probably is not going to talk about all of the question words. They may talk about what it is and maybe why. Or maybe they talk about what it is and how this happens. Perhaps they talk about when and where this happens. But the idea is that they write out the main ideas of that paragraph, preferably in one sentence, very briefly, right? So that they can, if they have to go back and reread, they can very easily see the key concepts. And this is important because sometimes when we read, we get so wrapped up in each paragraph, and then we go to the next paragraph, and then we go to the next paragraph. We don't look at it from a distance and say, okay, first they're talking about what, half of the article is about what, and then the next half is where. It gives you a whole other concept of what the article is about. Okay, so being able to do the gist, looking at the general idea, gives the reader and the learner, your students, a different perspective of, it's different ways of looking at the same text. Instead of first word, okay, I'm going to read. Okay, and maybe they understand it, maybe they don't, right? And so this is a very good strategy for them to use to help them understand the text
That video is
Yeah, it's in a sway.
yeah.
It's kind of a small one. It's right here. Okay? Alright, so this is one strategy. This is a reading strategy. Now, look at this one's kind of small. I'm trying to see if I can make it larger. There's another one right here. And this is a strategy, SQP2R2. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to discuss each one of these. This is an acronym. The first would be to survey or research. Now, this might be something about maybe inquiring. Maybe they need to look online and find information. So this might be a strategy for doing that. So first they survey or research or review. Then they question. They question or reframe the question or the problem. Okay, so this is very important here, actually trying to identify the problem. Not solve it, but just to identify it. What is the problem? Or what would be the problem in a different context? Maybe in a different area. Maybe the problem exists in purchasing. What would be a problem similar to that in accounting that would relate to whatever? All right, so research, question. Now predict, 6 facts of understanding. So predict what might happen. Okay? Read, reread, respond. So these are all different ways, and then summarize. If students are going to read a text or they're going to watch a video, this is a strategy that they can do. Before they watch the video or before they read, they could pose these questions like, okay, this is the situation, what do you think is going to happen in here, right? What's going to happen, where they predict what might happen in the future. Okay. So this is another strategy. Let's see. Let's look at this video here.
Hi, I'm Jack at Easy Math Tutoring. Today, I'd like to share with you 3 powerful learning strategies that can help your child improve their math skills and build self-confidence.
Now, even though some of these videos are for smaller kids, right? A lot of these the strategies also
Tip 1, talking aloud.
All right, now talking aloud. Let's think about it within the context of higher education in your class. So talk aloud. Think about a talk aloud when you ask your students, okay, when you were reading this article, how was it? Was it difficult for you? Was it easy for you? What did you do? What did you do that worked? What did you do that didn't work? It could be kind of strategic, like metacognitive, thinking about how they implemented strategies. Okay, that's one way. Talking aloud could also be, let's look at your performance test. You could ask your students, okay, when you were doing your interviews, how was it going? Right? What were you thinking at the time that you were doing the interviews? It's kind of like a recall exercise, right? Where they are actually thinking, reflecting in action. They're reflecting in the moment and sharing what they were thinking about at that particular time. These are strategies. Because the strategy is for them to be reflecting on what they did so that they could say, okay, maybe I could have done it differently, or maybe thinking back, maybe I did it pretty well. I think I did it okay because I was thinking about this or whatever. Okay, so this is a strategy of thinking, talk aloud. Now, talk aloud could be speaking, or it could be reflective, just a written reflection. But thinking about what they were thinking about at the time they were doing something. That's the thing. It's like thinking about what they were doing when they were doing it at that moment. Okay, so talk aloud. This is a strategy.
Talking aloud while doing math is a very important strategy. Chances are that your child already does this in their head. It's important for your child to talk aloud so that you can hear their thoughts and notice exactly where they're having trouble.
That's the key right there. They probably already do this, but it's for you, the teacher, it's for you to say, okay, for them to share with you problems that they may have had. And so that then you can figure out if you need to intervene, if you need to offer more assistance, if they come into problems. Right?
Without this, a lot of thinking mistakes can go unnoticed for a long time. A lot of underachievers, especially in maths, try to solve a problem in complete silence inside their heads. Your child will have many thoughts popping into their head, and when thoughts are jumbled, it can be hard to solve even simple problems. Your child must talk aloud to give their thoughts structure.
Yeah, that's something that I see with my students. Sometimes they get, if I don't, I have to ask them because sometimes it's not obvious, but when they start to talk to me about, oh, I can't find this, I can't find that, when I was doing this, I had a hard time doing this. When they start to explain their problems, I can see right away that maybe they're making it more difficult than it needs to be. They're totally thinking in another way that I was thinking, or that I wanted them to do. So this is trying to give structure, like I mentioned here, trying to give structure to their process, their thought process, so that they don't kind of get off topic. And the only way that you're going to know that they're getting kind of confused is if you have some way of asking them, or that they have a way of reflecting on what they're doing. All right, so, again, the talk aloud could be like a group. Okay, what were you guys thinking when you were doing this? Oh, well, I was trying to, I was thinking that. It could be like that. Or it could be individual. It could be groups. They could work in groups and share their reflection. Right? So there's, depending on time, how long it takes, and you do things like this when you feel that you really need to. Like if your students are really having a hard time, then when my students are really confused, I do this. So okay, what were you guys thinking about whenever you're doing this? So that I can further understand what the problem is, so that I can figure out how to help them.
Tip 2, back-checking. Back-checking is...
I
have to go. Okay, no problem. No problem.
Because it's
No, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, the presentations. That's fine. When you get a chance, take a look at these. These are some examples. And for next week, if you can try to bring in your ideas about compare and contrasting. Maybe do just do this.
Okay,
rather
well,
organized. You don't have to write out that much. Just a couple of lists, and share with me, and we can discuss kind of the differences between any learning strategies that you would do Spanish class versus an English class.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. And
I don't know why Bogart is not here. He's
maybe
arrived
he has.
early.
What's that? Oh, he was here early.
Yeah.